Just a reminder that your previous year's donations, the income tax receipts, are ready to be picked up. You can pick them up in our bookstore, in the gift shop. So during times of prayer, so please check our schedule for times of prayer. You can come at that time and you can ask Rose or Amable, our custodian. Rose is our secretary, so we can get your receipts for you at that time. In regards to today's gospel reading, today is the feast of Saints Timothy and Titus. They were bishops, they were assistants of St. Paul. And today's gospel reading, it's the account of our Lord sending out 70 of his disciples in pairs ahead of him. And notice how he mentions the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. And I think it's worthwhile for us to consider the question, why does our Lord ask the faithful, all of us, to pray for laborers in the harvest? So of course he's talking about a harvest of souls. And so the laborers are those who work for the salvation of souls. And the reality is that every one of us are called to do that. But yes, it's true that we tend to focus especially on priests, but also missionaries. And when we think of missionaries, it's not just priests, but also missionary brothers and sisters. In fact, even here in North America, the secondary patrons are the Jesuit martyrs, and they weren't all priests. Some of them were lay brothers. So traditionally, often you would have a community of nuns or a community of brothers with some priests also going to countries into missionary lands, and they would set up a convent or a monastery, and they would start schools and sometimes nursing homes, orphanages, and hospitals or medical centers also. So they were the ones who did all this missionary work. So one of the reasons our Lord asks us to pray for laborers is so that these laborers can go to countries that have not yet heard the word. That's one reason. But the other reason is that these laborers are needed because they have to maintain the faithful in the ways of faith. And they do this by their preaching, of course, but also by means of the sacraments. In other words, to grant to the faithful, even in countries where Christianity has been established, so from one generation to the next, the life-giving sacraments. So only a priest can celebrate Mass. Only a priest can give us the Eucharist. Only a priest can make our Lord present for us here and now. When we think about this, we tend to take it for granted. And I think especially here in Toronto, Toronto is a big city. And in big cities, you have priests from other countries coming. They want to stay here. There's many opportunities for them to study and good culture. There's a lot of cultural things, you know. Of course, during this pandemic, all of these things are not accessible. That's true. But Toronto is very fortunate in that we have a lot of priests. A lot of them are immigrant priests from other countries. But if you go into the smaller towns or smaller cities, you will notice that there is definitely a priest shortage today. And it's very unfortunate. So we tend to take priests for granted. I recently heard a story about John Paul II, St. John Paul II. He was relating a story of under communism in a small town. And he stated that on Sundays, the people would come to church. They would gather in church. And in the front, there was an empty chair. And on that empty chair, they would place a purple stole. And then they would weep. And the reason they were weeping is because they did not have a priest. So the communists killed many of the priests, got rid of many of the priests. And so the people were deprived of priests, and they were deprived of the sacraments. The people could not go to confession. They could not receive our Lord in Holy Communion. And this lasted for many, many years under communism. And why is it that certain groups want to get rid of the church or to suppress the church, to suppress the voice of the church, to corrupt the church even from within? And part of the reason is that we are an obstacle to some of their goals. So they kind of want to have a one world religion, a one world government where everybody just conforms. So Christianity teaches morality. And when we speak about moral issues, same-sex marriage or abortion or even the legalization of marijuana, a lot of people will disagree with us and they will oppose us. And as time goes on, these groups become more powerful, more influential, and in many ways they actually grow in numbers also. So the voice of the church is being diminished in many ways. And our freedoms, our restrictions are being diminished also. So this was very extreme under communism. Here in North America, it's a little bit more gradual, but it is happening. So we see this even in the Catholic educational system. So we have to kind of incorporate politically correct manners of speech and things like that. So there's pressure being put on the Catholic school system to do this. And, we have Michael Del Grande, one of our school trustees, and he was trying to oppose some of these terrible things. And he was attacked by his fellow school trustees who are all supposed to be Catholics representing our faith. And, recently it was pointed out that some of the websites that very young children in the Catholic schools can access lead them to other sites that is very explicit about homosexual practices and things like that, which is very age inappropriate. So, I mean, if a child, searches these things out on their own at home or on their own computer or whatever, well, that's one thing. But if it's through the Catholic school system and through Catholic websites, that ought to cause us concern. So the whole point is that we are being attacked and our freedoms are being restricted. And this is why our Lord also says in today's gospel reading, "Go on your way. See, I am sending you out like lambs into the midst of wolves." Like lambs in the midst of wolves. Not just one wolf, but many wolves. And a lamb can't defend itself against wolves. In other words, you're going to be torn apart. So if we understand this, why would a young man want to become a priest if he's just going to be attacked? Well, of course, to become a priest, it's a call from God. It's not just something that an individual wants. Yes, there should be an inclination and desire, but it's usually because the individual has a great love of God and wants to share the love of God and the goodness of God and the truths of God with the people around him. So, even myself, I've been verbally attacked, not physically, but verbally attacked. People have pointed at me and said, "Oh, there goes the child molester," just because there were some scandals in the church at that time. And this happened more than once. And I was also attacked even by parishioners in various parishes for preaching the truth. So if we want vocations, we have to preach the truth. But yeah, I was just preaching on the fact that premarital sex is immoral, that it's a mortal sin. And, granted, sometimes priests, we might be too harsh in how we present our message. That's possible, yeah. But we try to present it in a charitable manner and in ways that people can hopefully understand. But yeah, I was attacked by a young lady, and she said, "Oh, that's like pre-Vatican II, and, this is we're in the 2000s now, and times have changed, and this is like a fire and brimstone homily." So if priests are not preaching the truth, why would young people be attracted by it? So young people will attack us, yes, but if we water down the faith, in other words, if priests don't preach the truth regarding morality, and we, by our silence, we kind of give the message, well, do whatever you want, it's okay. And then when we have funerals, we kind of assume that everyone just makes it to heaven. So in other words, we're saying there's no hell. We're not preaching about moral issues. We're not promoting people going to confession. Then it's kind of like what we're saying is, well, it's okay if you're sinning and doing what everybody else in society is doing. When it comes time for your death and your funeral, we will canonize you. We will tell everyone that you are in heaven. Well, if this is the message that priests are giving to their faithful, and in many ways it is, then why would Christianity appeal to young people? In other words, what does Christianity have to offer that, that you can't get somewhere else? But if the reality is that there is an afterlife and there is heaven and there is also hell, and that we are called to live morally upright lives, and so we need to preach on the fact that certain sins are mortal sins, and you could end up in hell if you continue in those sins. Then there's something that appeals to young people. In other words, they want to hear the truth, and deep down, people know the truth. They know the truth about morality. So what I'm trying to say is that, yes, we have to pray for vocations to the priesthood and to the religious life, and we do that after Mass or now after our communion services. But we also have to proclaim the truth, and not just priests, but all of us. And we need to oppose injustices in society, because we're just allowing these things to happen, whether it's in our school system or in society in general, the government and the laws that they enact, and euthanasia, assisted suicide, terrible things. And we are called to oppose these things, because the salvation of souls depends upon our efforts. This is why we need priests. This is why we need laborers in the harvest. And one of the reasons our Lord also mentions the need for praying for this is not just so that communities will be sustained in their faith, or not just so that missionaries will go to different nations, but because our Lord knew that especially near the end times, there will be fewer and fewer vocations to the priesthood. Like I said, you and I here in Toronto, we may not see that happening. But if you go to other provinces, other places, smaller towns, you see this happening, that there is a shortage of priests. And eventually, we may not be able to receive the sacraments, at least not as frequently as we would like.